Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello and welcome. Today I'm with David Pereira, who is a Chief Product Officer at Omoqo, but also has a very interesting product leadership career in different companies in Germany. And on top of that, he's also a coach, writer, and speaker, and he's originally from Brazil. And I'm sure we will uncover very interesting stories from that career path. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me here.
And just to get started, maybe can you expand a bit on my brief introduction? Can you give us a bit more words about yourself and what you have been doing lately?
Sure. So let's say I'm a very curious person who loves solving problems and hates wasting time. So I started my career as a software engineer, and one of the things that made me move to product management was someone telling me, this is what you have to do. And I would ask why. And the person would tell me, because the boss of my boss told me that, so you should just follow. So that is why I got into product management, been in different places. And it's funny because, there's this equation of digital product road, and I have been in different parts of it. Software engineer, product manager, product owner, head of product, CPO, and in different countries, different companies. And funny enough, I see more or less the same problems all over the place.
Interesting. And by the way, I can really relate to that origin story to product management because I follow a very similar path, or very similar reasons at least. Very interesting. And by the way, in terms of Omoqo, can you give us some context on what's that company about?
Sure. Omoqo is a very new startup that was born last year, trying to innovate in the maritime industry. So we are a member of a big company in Hamburg. And the reason I joined Omoqo is because I learned that the maritime industry in general is quite outdated, and there's a big opportunity of innovating, which is different than other industries that are quite modern, and it's hard to innovate there. So that's what we're trying to do, to step up the maritime industry.
Very interesting. Okay. All right. So how I usually start going through or trying to uncover some interesting strategy stories is to ask you maybe to focus on one particular case in which you were creating a story. Not sure if you had already a chance to do it on Omoqo or we should go back in history, but try to go through your process, basically the steps you went through to come up with this strategy, maybe some frameworks or tools you use, and yeah, some examples that you can share with us to get a feeling on how you prepare this work.
Sure, that sounds good. We would need to go back and pass. Omoqo recently, we have deployed a strategy, but we are still progressing. So I cannot tell you if this strategy is working well because we don't have the results to tell that. So far, the team is working towards that, but I cannot tell the results. Then we can travel back in past.
Okay, sounds good. But can you give us some hints on how it started?
Sure. So the company I'm mentioning is Instacarro, and Instacarro had the mission of disrupting the second-hand car market in Brazil. The reason is it's bureaucratic, it's full of scam, and it's hard to sell your car. So it takes a while. And for car dealers, it also takes a while for them to find nice cars. We wanted to solve it, helping car dealers find cars that they want while helping car owners sell their cars. So that was the business. And I joined also in the beginning. I think I joined after the company, after the seed investment 6 months later. And the company was only making 2 to 3 deals a month. And they said, what is happening? And that was the moment I had to step back and start creating the strategy.
Interesting. Okay, and maybe how do you went about it? So what's the first step? When you say, hey, I need to create a strategy, the good realization moment, but what you did first?
So of course, there's always the reality and the theory, but the reality is the following. My first day, it was like these movies, you know. I met with the CEO in a hospital. Like on Sunday, he texted me and said, "Don't go to the office tomorrow. I will be with my wife in the hospital. Here's the address, and we will meet in the lobby." And then I went there, and he told me, "Our dealer's app sucks, and for some reason, dealers are not engaging with that. Despite the fact we have around 1,000 dealers registered, they just don't use it. So your mission is make them use it. You have 3 months. I don't want an excuse." And then he looked at me. "By the way, we have $10 million. That means we have 10 months because we spend 1 million a month. So you better figure out how to prove that we are worth a Series A investment, or you need to find another job." He stood up, said, "No excuse." And then I said, "Oof." Then I was left
Motivation was
pondering.
high, I guess.
Yeah. And it was the moment I got myself thinking, because I had another offer, and then I was thinking, maybe I just take the other offer and I go back to this. And I was really thinking, I said, or maybe I think this is an opportunity. I said, let me reflect. Because I said, I need to read between the lines. He said, what I'm telling you is we have people interested in our business, but the solution we have right now doesn't fit them. So then I said, let's create. The vision was quite clear, but the strategy was not really established. So the company was trying to do everything at the same place. And for me, a good strategy gives you guidance. So it tells you what to focus on and what to drop. And that was missing. And I could not create a strategy on my first day, but I had to learn. What I decided to do was first to talk to these guys who are dealers and understand their problems, and then talk to the car owners and understand their motivations. And then I decided, for okay, during my first 2 weeks, I'm gonna visit from 10 to 20 car dealers and talk to from 10 to 20 car owners and understand what's going on. Then something got very clear to me. Car dealers really struggle to find cars, and they had hoped that we would be the place to go for them to find good deals. And the same went to car owners, because our value proposition was, we help you sell your car in 1.5 hours. You come to us, we inspect your car, go to an auction platform, and then at the end of that, you get an offer. Either you take it, go home by cab, or you decline it and pay nothing. So very good. So that resonated. Said, but now how do we make a business out of that correctly? So then I needed to think on how to create the focus we needed. So I sat down with the COO, and I sat down with the marketing director as well. And then we started imagining on the conditions. Imagine the audience we have. Because car dealers, we were targeting everyone, from people who would sell like 10 cars a month to the guys who would sell 1,000. So these are just different games. And then the first thing we said, we need to target the small ones, because they are the ones who are struggling the most to find cars, and it's easier to talk to them. So it was clearly, we defined a smaller niche to focus. So that was the first aspect of this. And we said, how do we differentiate? What I understood from the car dealers was the pain that they had. I said, when I get a car, my biggest fear is being scammed, and then I have to pay for something and so on, and I receive. And then I said, okay, we need to address this, because that's their biggest fear, and it seems that they don't have a remedy for that. If we can create a differentiation on this, I don't know how, but if we can address this, these guys are going to engage. So that was small car dealers addressing this remedy, and then with the car owners, there was something about the trust. They didn't really trust that there was a competition for their cars. They said, yeah, I come here, but you do some magic, and then after an hour you give me an offer. But was there a competition? Was it something? Did you really do something? So we need to get them engaged on our process and become it more transparent. Because I learned that the experience was quite horrible. And I learned that by doing it, I tried to sell my car in one of the stores. The moment I handed my car key to the moment I left the place, nobody talked to me. They only talked to the moment I would get the offer. I was pissed. I had to wait for 1.5 hours. No one talked to me. I didn't know what was happening. And one of the strategy was to have a pleasant experience. So we needed to provide a decent experience. At least the person should be calm. Then we provided this and so on. And then that helped us focus on the action because that got clear what we needed to do and what we didn't need to. And then after that, we could talk about objectives, we could talk about the other things. Because if you don't have this, then it's just running in circles.
Yeah, interesting. So one clarification question, because I was trying to understand the model as we go. The car owner will go to one particular store from your company, and in there they will receive the inspection afterwards the offer.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we call that the inspection
Yeah.
point. Was just a place, could be in a shopping center and so on. We would have a person there, would take several pictures and report the defects of the car and put in a platform, auction platform, and then the car dealers would see that and they could place bids for this car for 1 hour.
Perfect. So maybe interesting question, knowing that you spoke with many of them. Did you? I mean, you expressed this problem as saying this is very clearly the problem we need to address. Was that a very clear signal, or you received kind of different signals for different problems and you picked one?
It was a very clear signal for small dealers, not for bigger ones.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting. So when
because
you focus on a niche, you say this is the pattern we're seeing.
yes, exactly.
Okay,
The
perfect.
bigger ones, they had different problems. They had logistic problems, uh, more complicated things that I said, I think we are too small to address these kind of problems because they didn't sell the cars for the same town only. They would sell to other places, and then they had problems, for example, with the transportation. They need to ensure that had insurance for that and so on. And I said, if you can deal with this, then you will be attractive to me. And then I said, no, okay, but I said, okay, but then I was then from the small ones, I was telling them what makes a bad day for you, and almost all of them came with something like a bad day to me is when I realize I bought a bad car, I made a bad deal. That will cause me a lot of headaches because there's no chance I can return the car. There's no chance I'm gonna find the previous car owner, and this person is not gonna give me the money back, and I still have the car to sell.
Yeah, got it. Got it. Interesting. But very, I mean, it's nice when you find these very painful problems because kind of there is for sure value in solving them. So maybe going one step further, now you have this problem very clearly identified. Yours, you will focus. I mean, you will say that your strategy is kind of identifying this problem and say, "Hey, teams, let's focus on solving this problem." Or were some type of okay, want to solve this problem in this particular way also part of the strategy?
It was open. We didn't know how to solve the problem, but we defined what was our North Star metric. People accepting the offer. So we needed the car owners to accept the offer. Because if you think about it, if we solve this problem, what was the hope behind it? More car dealers would engage in the auction, there would be more competition, and then consequently, the winning bid would be higher than it used to be, and then the car owner would accept that. That was the hope. And we thought that was exactly the point between us and growing this North Star metric. But how we would get there, we didn't know. And then we said, let's figure out and try different things.
Perfect. And maybe going back and forth in the strategy definition process, but when you were saying, I know this is the right problem to solve, are you in some way quantifying that? Or, yeah, maybe that's the underlying hypothesis, let's say, on how much you will expect or what different, for example, you said engagement of the dealers. So were you actually quantifying how much engagement you can get or something like that?
Yes, we were. Then after this, we said, if our hypothesis is right, what does success look like? And then we said, if it's right, it will be a minimum of 30% plus engagement. Because in our case, our engagement was horrible. We had there 1,000 dealers, and out of these 1,000, only 500 had ever looked for a car. And that placed bids, only 100 placed a bid ever. And only around 10 to 15 bought cars. So it was really bad. Then we had this. Of course, we realized something else as well. Our solution was a misfit because we tried to do that in a mobile app. And dealers didn't buy cars from mobile apps, they bought from the web. So they would look through big screens. That was another problem and was part of the strategy to create a solution for the dealers. Because the CEO had in mind the road is mobile. So we need to be mobile first in everything. I said, your road is mobile, but the dealer's road is not. So we need to create a solution for them, not for us. So that was part of the strategy as well.
Perfect. Interesting. Okay, so we quantified this now. So maybe a glimpse on how this will look like after the strategy is created. So do you have some sort of document or I don't know, artifact that reflects this strategy?
So we were quite simple on that. We wrote things on the wall. So that's what we did. We left everything written there.
The good old days.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But we had some team members working in another place already. Then what we did was a classic Confluence page with the vision and then the strategy and the key result. We didn't call it key results back then. We said the objectives that we wanted to achieve, and that's it. We made it public. And what we would do is, after every second week, we would look at the objectives and ask ourselves, how did we progress with that? How happy are we with our progress? What could we do to accelerate? And so on. So that's how we did it. Made it public in Confluence. It's funny because that was
But in Confluence, this look like, so sorry, just to clarify, is just kind of one paragraph describing it, or is, I don't know,
bullet
how
points.
it will look like in Confluence? Bullet points. Okay,
Bullet
perfect.
points. That's it. The strategy was compound of 5 bullet points, and we had, I don't recall exactly now, 3 or 4 objectives.
Okay, perfect. Good.
And we had a North Star.
Sorry, I interrupted you before. We're saying something else around these slides?
No, I was just going to say that it's funny because this story is 2016 and 17, and it's long ago, 6-7 years ago. But one of the frameworks I use now, which I didn't know back then, is the decision stack framework, which says first you have the vision, and then from the vision you can ask, how do I get to this? And then you say, to the strategy. And then you say, how do I get to the strategy? To the objectives. And then you ask, how do I get to this? Through product principles. The only thing missing there in 2016 was the product principles, but the rest we had without knowing. So now I can say
Yeah,
that's why I
yeah.
said reality and theory. Theory, I could say we used the decision stack framework, but the reality is we just thought what would be helpful for us that moment, and then we created this, and we were
Yeah.
evolving. The strategy remained the same for 6 months. We didn't change that. The objectives we adapted as we learned, uh, but the result was quite good. To make it clear, we went from buying 2 cars a month to 600 in a period of 6 months. I think it created some
So
results.
very successful. Okay, interesting. I have one more question around the connection from the strategy to the execution. So you said we have these objectives and we will review them periodically. Is this part of a ceremony? Like, I know now we will know the OKR checking or something like that. Was something like this periodicity or something different?
In our case, we had a sprint review, and we used the review to present our results. And back then, I was already a bit tired with boring sprint reviews. I said, cannot be just a walkthrough and so on. I said, let's make it more interactive and more meaningful. I said, we have objectives. Let's say how what we achieved contribute to the objectives. and let's continuously navigate and look to the numbers, to what to deliver, and so on. So we use the review also to navigate on that, and it was quite interesting because our business partners would challenge that and say, I don't think what you're saying is actually happening. Which evidence do you have? So we were moving to something concrete. That was quite nice to bring that to the sprint review, because then we got actionable insights.
Yeah, and you move the discussion more to the outcomes, not necessarily only
Exactly.
to the feature. And one more question around this is, so you have multiple ways of solving this issue of don't let the car dealers get scammed, let's put it away. And I imagine you can have things like very complex things like, hey, let's bought insurance or whatever that can take months only to make the deal with the insurance company or whatever. So how do you actually go about selecting, okay, now with this strategy, with this problem we need to solve, which are the real opportunities we can tackle, and how to kind of, I won't say prioritize them, but kind of organize them over time?
That's quite interesting. So we went around the insurance, but we walked out of this very fast. But then we started understanding what are the factors that define a deal as a bad one. So we understood what kind of things the dealers were looking for, and then we implemented one thing that they could really adored, which was when you go to pick up your car, if by any means it's not what you expect, you don't need to pick it. So you can just walk away from it. We stick with the car. And then we said there's a risk. The risk is fully on our side, and we said how do we change? How do we avoid this? If we do a good inspection and we cover the points that these guys are looking at correctly, and we make it transparent from the beginning when they are participating in the auction, then most probably there will be only a few cars returned. And I said, and if it comes to the point that the car is returned, then it ended the situation that we bought the car. Then we said, then we need to sell this car later, which was not our intention of buying cars. So we took the risk. We said, if we do our job right, it seems that it's not going to happen. It ended up that in the beginning, we bought some cars. So like every 10th car bought, there would be one, the guy would say, I'm not picking this. So we had some cars, and then we had to enhance our process. Then we learned that was one thing that could avoid that, and we included in the commission that we had with the dealers. Before we close the deal, we would pay a specific company to do an inspection in the car, because dealers actually, they were considering bad deal a car that had an accident and was not reported, or was stolen and was not reported, and something like this. But then you could do a more in-depth paid inspection that costed like 50 euros, and then that would guarantee that you knew everything about the car. And then we would say, okay, so if that happened, then we don't close the deal. We just tell the person, here's what we found. So sorry, we cannot keep our.
You lied, so
Yeah, exactly. You didn't tell us that. And then later in the process, we even implemented, if we do an inspection and we come to this point, you as the car owner, you're going to pay for that because you didn't tell us. So if there is something we should know, you tell us. So we implemented this, very honest. But yeah, of course, it was funny. We got to a point we had, I don't know, I think we had a couple of dozens of cars. So we had to do some auctions there to get rid of them. We lost money. Of course, we lost a lot of money. But the thing is, we took a pragmatic approach, and we tried to progress in finding what are the things that are deal breaker for them that would make them return the car and so on. So we quickly identified there were 3 or 4 items. Then we include them in the inspection.
I love that. The execution part, it's brilliant, and kind of discovery driven. So I see all the little nice nuggets on that. When you, let me be a bit more precise on when you were selecting this path, you were already committing to, hey, we will kind of do this, instead of insurance. So we walk away from insurance. We selected this path of, hey, the option is you walk away without the deal. Was this something that was decided early on, or did you test multiple variants and say, hey, this is the one that is working on? How this is kind of strategy to actually doing the continuous improvement worked?
So we tested some things, We didn't test as much as I would do today. That's the funny part, because we had some assumptions. So we did the assumptions, and then we had some prototype testing. We got some dealers and asked them to test it, and we made the information prominent there and so on to check if they would not compete for the cars that had this as the deal breaker. And we quickly proved that most of the dealers would just not compete. If they see that the car was stolen or had an accident, they would just not place any bid. They would
Just
just exclude that. So that proved so they won't compete. But it turned out, actually, the first implementation, some dealers just didn't see this image. So we started making more prominent later. Then we said, okay, it's a deal breaker. Dealers need to know that. We put some warning signs there and so on. Pay attention.
yeah,
Might be a car you don't want to buy. Said it's honest.
yeah. Interesting, interesting. Okay, so we talk about reviewing the strategy early on. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, and maybe not sure if, or maybe I will frame it differently. Do you see a difference throughout your experience with this kind of more startup trying to find product market fit sort of a strategy to more, I don't know, I would say mature company or mature product strategy, and yeah, maybe some ideas around that?
Yeah, for sure. I see a big difference. Startups, let's say, they don't care about risk because a startup is a risk business. So we care about.
It's all risk.
It's all risk. It's all over the place. So we don't even talk about risk because everything is risk. So we strive to learn as fast as possible, which doesn't mean we neglect risk. We just focus on what we can do and learn. And it creates a lot of, let's say, eureka moments. Say, oh, that's it. That's it. So we don't think a lot. We just get things moving in a very simple and pragmatic way. That's what I see in startups. But when the companies start going to scale ups, it changed, and it changed in a weird way because there's a lot of conversation on how to get the job done, and it reduced the amount of action to get the job done itself. It's quite shocking, this, because this team I was telling you in the beginning, we were 7 software engineers and that's it, and we were progressing quite crazy. And then yes, we scaled that to 15 software engineers later, but like everyone on the same thing, just going and so on. And I worked with companies with more than 100 software engineers, and I had the feeling that we delivered less than the 15 because there's a lot of conversation around, and the conservative, and it's really risk averse and trying to place the perfect bet.
Okay, interesting. Knowing that you are kind of super deep into discovery, I mean, my question is basically, what do you attribute this slowness to? Because at the end of the day, you can be as risk averse, but instead of kind of having a discussion in your own room and discussing with the people in the company, you can just experiment more things and will have the same feeling of speed as a startup. So, how do you think about that? What do you think is something that kind of drive us into this direction of being slower and more risk averse?
I think there are two aspects. One is where the decision power lies. So generally what I notice, the bigger the company, the more decision power is on the higher ups, and then the teams are less empowered. So it means like teams cannot really decide on what to discover and so on. That's one of the case. And for me, the other is the structure, which shocks me quite a bit. Some teams, they have clear defined identities. So for example, we are going back to there. In our case, we were software teams, and we didn't say like we are the dealers team or we are the customer team. We were a product team, and we would do whatever was necessary for that moment. In one of the e-commerce I worked, we got in a situation that we struggled with retention. So customers would come to us once and they would never come back. So for sure, that's not a sustainable business. And we had 7 teams. One of the teams was responsible for product information management, which was a system that had no problem. It worked well, it was internal usage, and it really didn't need an update. It was fine, it was getting the job done. But we had a huge problem with retention. But when we defined the roadmap, this team didn't know what to do, and then they just decided to change the technology to use a more updated technology because they were the product information team and they had to improve that, not what the company needed back then. So the structure was a problem because they were not flexible to tackle other problems.
Yeah, yeah, interesting because I was in the hands of the product leaders to kind of change that, saying, "Hey, now this is in maintenance mode, and we need to all teams focus on this one." But yeah, I mean, it's those are things are decisions are hard to make. That's what.
Sure, I would see the same as you. So of course it depends on who the product leader is to influence on that. In this case, the product leader reported to the CTO. So for me, that is a dysfunction. They were not peers. The CTO was the one who could call the shots, not the CPO. So it's
Interesting.
a little bit dysfunctional, I would say, in this case.
Okay. Okay. Maybe reflecting on this, I think I want to ask you something else about discovery. And you said, "Hey, what the teams can do discovery on," and it's all about strategy with uncertainty. So, in the case you describe, you quickly find that you have a very clear problem to solve, but many times, and I assume especially on more mature products, which are not just finding product market fit, but trying to find opportunities to grow and so on. The bets are not so clear, or you are kind of picking more on, hey, we have this kind of very light indication that things may move in this direction, but we don't have, or we have a
Yeah.
lot of uncertainty. So have you faced that? And knowing that you are kind of deep into discovery, what would you recommend in these situations for strategy props creation?
Sure. I have faced this also. I worked in mature companies. So we were in some situations that we were kind of a plateau level. We didn't grow, we didn't go down, and so on. What we do now, and so on. I was thinking that we were about to go in a decline, but we were hopeful that we could go up still. Then in this case, we started doing the following. We start looking to because the thing is, when you are very established and maybe you have, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of users or more, then you can zoom in and try finding opportunities. Because what generally happens, companies start looking at what is my conversion rate, and they say, my conversion rate is 3.3. Say, okay, but what is your conversion rate in Android people using this screen size? Say, with this screen size is actually a 1.2 opportunity. So you can zoom in different scenarios and try and understand what happens in this scenario. And sometimes it's a time to zoom out also, but in big organizations, I think going in more details and in more specific scenarios, you have better chance of finding more opportunities. So that is one thing that I like doing.
Perfect. Interesting. And in those cases, will you, I mean, in terms of strategy creation, this sounds like, hey, let's optimize experience. Will you say that's your strategic driver, so that's part of your bullet point, or will you do some sort of analysis on the opportunities before jumping to, say, writing the strategy?
Yeah, I would. So in this case, for example, I would try understanding what is important for the company right now. So going back to this example, I said we're not going up, we are not going down. So retention is okay. So what matters more now? And I would align with the leadership understanding what do they see. Is it a moment maybe
Okay.
to grow to another market, or is it a moment to cross sale? Do we want to increase the customer value lifetime? What do we want to achieve? And then I would try understanding from the leadership the direction they want the company to go. And then from there, I would search for opportunities, and then I would establish the strategy from this. But I would need, for example, support from the leadership to come up with. In this example I mentioned, there was an assumption which we would need to test. We had a chance of increasing customer lifetime value. So we said maybe we increase basket size or order frequency and so on. But what we wanted ultimately was the lifetime value. Then I went to
Okay.
create some assumptions and so on.
Okay, perfect. So it's more about finding opportunities given the kind of the situation in the company and the direction that the company wants to
Exactly.
go. And how do you combine that? Because I mean, again, kind of your teams doing discovery, they will kind of normally uncover opportunities. Maybe those opportunities are not fully related to whatever strategy or objectives that you're pursuing at the moment. do you have you experienced any kind of way to do some bottom up information of opportunities to the leaders, in which saying, hey, we know that in this space we have opportunities, and kind of proving if this is a worth strategy?
Yeah, I have seen that. It was in a very funny situation. We got informed the roadmap, and the roadmap was a gigantic list of features. And then,
I've seen this one.
yeah, I guess so. And this is one of the things I recommend teams. I mentioned about the structure sometimes isn't helpful, and also sometimes the leadership retains the decision power, not the team. That doesn't mean the team should comply with this. Sometimes companies are just not aware another way of working, and it's your job as a product professional to speak up. You shouldn't do things just the way people want you to do. In this case, for
Mhm.
example, I said, all right, let's say we deliver all of these 15 features. What does it make to us? How do we become better? And then the company leadership starts saying, well, we will be in a better position than now. I said, how? And then we start having an exchange.
Mhm.
And at some point in time, then it reverted back to me and to the other product managers. All right, but you are challenging. What is your suggestion? I said, I don't know. I said, maybe if you give us time to figure out some opportunities, we could tell you what are the places that are the low hanging fruits and the potential bets you could make. I said, but what you are telling me is a bunch of solutions which we don't know the problem behind them. And my fear is implementing a feature that solves a problem we don't know, and the result can be we create a problem we should not have. If that's what you want, we just do it. But I don't recommend that.
Mhm.
The leadership then
Yeah.
said, 2 weeks, no more. You have 2 weeks to invest on doing what you are talking about. And then you present to us the opportunities, and then we come up with a new roadmap.
Interesting. And what will you do? I mean, what will you now in imaginary situation? What, let's say some team follow this process and get these 2 weeks. What will you suggest them to do exactly to get some opportunities in 2 weeks?
Well, it depends a lot on the size of the company. This is a real story that happened. So,
Yeah.
what we did, we looked at many of our numbers, and then we tried to understand which were the ones that they seemed like had room for improvement. One of the things we realized, we didn't have actually a lot of customer acquisition channels. We mainly relied a lot on paid acquisition channel. We didn't have organic very well. Said, that can be a potential, because then we could automatically increase customer lifetime value, and we could grow more sustainably, because paying for marketing all the time is not sustainable. So this is something. And then we said, okay, and how is our customer satisfaction rate? What we realized is actually the customers were pretty satisfied with our services. So maybe there would be an opportunity of transforming them into promoters. So that's what we did. So in the 2 weeks, what we did first, look at the numbers, try and finding which numbers maybe they don't stand out. Some numbers are quite beautiful, and then you can see the ones not standing out, and then you say, what are the ones that stand out? Maybe I do something with this. So we combined
Yeah.
the high cost of acquisition cost with the satisfaction rate and create an assumption. Probably customers are
Mhm.
willing to recommend us.
Perfect. Yeah. Got it. Got it. I like it. I like it. A good way to unlock more strategic conversation as well. So it's always appreciated. All right. I feel that night is a great time to ask my usual closing question, what is basically what I'm not asking. So, what's some interesting learning you had along the way that I mean, related to strategy that we didn't cover with my questions?
What you're not asking in terms of strategy is when to follow and when to challenge. So sometimes someone has a strategy, and is it the moment to follow that strategy, or is it the moment to challenge it? So I've been in a situation where the strategy was already defined, and I didn't know if I should challenge or if I should directly follow that. So what I learned is as a product manager, you need to decide which fights to pick. And sometimes following a bad strategy is actually good, because then you can help people understand. It's kind of you help them understand why that was bad with a small failure. You just need to reduce the size of the failure, and then you have arguments to talk about them. So sometimes I decided to follow a bad strategy intentionally, and I took the smallest part of that, and we tried to achieve, and then we had evidence to talk. Because in the beginning, I was a very challenging person. So if I didn't believe this in the strategy, I would start challenging you straight away. Lack of strategy, I would challenge and challenge, and not everyone accept that. Not everyone.
Yeah.
But when you talk about arguments and results, then it gets in a different way.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I will argue that it makes a lot of sense, because at the end of the day, we want to be evidence-based decision makers. And if you are just arguing the strategy with your opinion, you are just as bad as the other person selecting the strategy with their opinion. So it's a good move to collect some evidence, even though it may take some time, some waste, as we'll call it. All right. So I will probably, first of all, thank you a lot for your time, but also invite you to say where can people find you? I know you do a lot, you write a lot, so where should people connect with you?
Sure. People can find me on LinkedIn, so David Pereira. And also you can find me on Substack. I have a newsletter there. It's Untrapping Product Teams. You can find under the URL dpereira.substack.com. I write once a week generally. I share ideas on how to untrap teams. The reason is I think most of the teams are trapped. Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. I try just showing them where they have opportunities. And as I said, sometimes you follow, sometimes you challenge. But I try sharing my experience because, I didn't do all the things right in my life. I learned from many mistakes and I share them openly with people.
Awesome. That's great. And again, thanks so much for all the insights you shared with us today.
Thank you a lot.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.